Well, hello YouTube, Steve Patton with General Patton Bushcraft back with you with another super exciting video. Today's video is the recap of Alone Season 11, Episode 8. Stay tuned. Alright friends, let's get right into it. This is the official recap of Alone Arctic Circle Season 11, Episode 8, titled The Marten Chronicles. That's as in Pine Marten. And the show starts out like every other show with a famous quote from a famous person. This one's from Alex Haley. He's the guy who wrote Roots, and I think he wrote the movie for Martin Luther King. Alright, and the quote is, "In every conceivable manner, the family is linked to our past, bridge to our future." That's by Alex Haley. Alright friends, it's day 30, 10:34 in the morning, and there's 4 people remaining. We got Sarah, William, Dub, and Timber. Alright, the show starts out with Timber. He's a 35-year-old from Indiana, USA, and it's a cold and frosty 33 degrees, friends. He goes down to the river, checks on his fish lines, his set lines, and he catches a nice 28-inch pike, and we see him put it on the stringer. Friends, his strategy is to keep him alive as long as he can out in the water. And he's back at camp. He has a 30-day celebration. Fresh fish fried in moose lard. Friends, he hears the snap of a twig. He hears a noise, and he gets up to go see. He decides to go down and check his fishing line again. And friends, he catches a second pike, a 40-inch pike. And he's complaining about all of the small predators that are giving him problems, like mice and birds. And while he's down there cleaning that 40-inch pike, we see one of those gray jays come into camp and starts eating the fish that he left by his fire. Hey, and he says, "You can't turn your back for a second." All right, friends, it's day 31, 10:01 in the morning, and the show goes over to William. He's the 49-year-old from Labrador, Canada, and William has lost 40 pounds since day 1. He's just waking up. He said he had a good night's sleep, and his strategy is to do less work, conserve energy and food. He checks on his food cache. Remember, that's that one that he had on that long pole through that tree hanging off the cliff. Friends, when we saw the sneak peek of this show at the end of last show, the show showed us that pine marten. So William gets up to his food cache, and friends, there's a pine marten eating on that gator. He chewed a hole right through the gator. And back 10 days ago, he named that marten Sassy. This is a very bold little pine marten. So he takes the food cache back to his shelter, shows us the hole that the marten chewed in his gator, and he cooks a piece of the fish a little longer because that marten was chewing on it. And he doesn't want to get sick, so good on William. Okay, it's day 31, 1:17 p.m., and the show goes back over to Timber. And he's showing us something that has chewed half of his fish away inside that big, massive food cache that he made, and he thinks it's mice. So he decides to build a Roland Welker style food cache. Roland is the one who he won season 7, friends, and he made a nice above ground food cache. So he makes one kind of in similar style. And on day 11, it's day 31 right now, but on day 11, Timber built that fish weir. He never used it, so he's building his Roland style food cache. It's an above ground. He's got an awesome idea, and he builds it between 2 trees where it's kind of high ground, real dry. He uses that fish weir as a floor, And friends, he gets some big old timber, some big logs, builds a big old square box. He takes that moose hide that he has and his multi-tool, and he sews up the hole in it where the arrow went through the hide, killed that big old bull moose. He sews it shut with some snare wire, and then he lines his whole food cache with the moose hide, with the fat on the outside. His strategy is that the mice will be able to nibble on the fat of the hide, but they won't chew a hole through. We'll see. But he builds that food cache, and it is a thing of beauty. It's a ground box. Very nice food cache. Okay, it's still day 31. It's 5:19 p.m. in the evening, and the show goes back over to Dub now. Excuse me, Dub is the 44-year-old from Michigan, USA, and he shows us some footage of a beautiful owl that's in total hunting mode. Pretty cool looking owl. It's frosty outside. He puts on some more clothes and goes down to the river to check the gill net. And the river's looking really low. It's quite a few inches lower. Nothing in the gill net. Starts fishing. And about 6:32 p.m., friends, he hears a noise, and down the river there's a moose crossing. The moose crosses the river, goes on the other side of the river where Dub is, and walks right in front of Dub on the other side of the river. So his strategy is to let the moose pass and then try to call him back across the river and get a shot off. Well, the moose takes off into the forest, so he doesn't get a shot off on that moose. Okay, friends, it is now day 32 and it started snowing. 10:41 in the morning, Timber shows us a family of moose. He films it for his family. Real cool shot of a mom and a couple babies, and I think there was even a bull moose in that shot. Good footage on Timber. All right, it's day 32, 2:27 p.m., and the show goes over to Sarah. She's 48 years old from Alaska, USA, and the snow makes her miss home. She's telling us that she feels right at home in the snow. It's just like Alaska. Good on Sarah. And 6:49 that evening, she's back in the shelter with a fire. She had checked her fishing lines, nothing. She went, did a little hunting, no tracks in the snow. So no protein, no fat for Sarah. She's back in the shelter with a nice warm fire, and she tells us she's glad she did a whole lot of foraging. So she's got enough mushrooms, berries, and stuff stored up. So her belly's full every night, just not getting any protein or fat. But her mental state is still pretty good. All right, it's day 33, 2:53 p.m. The show goes back over to Timber, and Timber is making that top log for that food cache. And remember, I told you it's built between two trees. And what he does, he cuts some notches in the tree, and he wedges this top log that just snugs up the top of his food cache, and then he wedges it with some wedges, puts a lot of pressure on that top log that's in those square point notches in the trees, and his food cache looks really, really secure, friends. And I mean, it is a thing of beauty. He heads down to the river to get that pike that he left on the stringer. And friends, when he left that pike on the stringer, I'm thinking, oh man, I think maybe an eagle might take it. But he gets back down to the river he wants to get that, pull that stringer in, and friends, that pike is gone. That 40-inch pike is gone. That's 7 or 8 meals totally gone. He checks his other stringer, and it's still good. He's got that smaller pike on that one. So he cleans that one, puts it in his food cache. That fish is already frozen, friends. It's about 30 degrees. So everything's starting to freeze up. All right, friends, it's day 34, 11:25 in the morning. The show goes over to Dub. It's 30 degrees. He checks on his rabbit snares. All the snares are empty. Nothing in it. Friends, on the way back, he finds a nice beaver slide right down on the water's edge. So he decides he's got about 15 feet of snare wire left. So he creates a beaver trap on that beaver slide. And as he's pushing that stake in the water, he falls in, friends. Completely in the freezing water. Oh man. Both of his boots are full of water and he's soaking wet. So he finishes that snare and he decides he's got to get back to the shelter. And friends, he wanders around, a little bit delirious, hypothermia is starting to set in, and he wanders around an alder thicket for about an hour. He finally makes it back to the shelter, friends, about 3:20 in the afternoon. And he's peeling his clothes off, and we see the steam in that shelter as he gets undressed. All right, it's day 35 now, 11:48 in the morning, and the show goes back over to William. William decides to sleep in to almost noon. He finally gets up, checks his rabbit snares, nothing. Checks on a beaver snare, and friends, he gets a little papoose. He's got a small beaver in his snare, and a papoose, that's a name for a small beaver. He was hoping on a big 60-pounder, but he has to settle for that small one. So he heads back, cleans it up. He's got that big rock face by his shelter. That's where he does his cleaning and cooking and everything. He's back over there, cleans that little guy, eats some of it, and then he decides to wrap it up, sandwich it between two spruce boughs, and he wraps the meat up in the beaver hide, and he buries it under some rocks. And friends, I don't know if that's gonna work. William's been having bad luck from the pine martens getting his food. So we'll see if that works out for him. Okay, day 36 now, 11:21 in the morning. The show goes back over to Timber. He's showing us a pine marten in a tree right behind him. The participants, they can't kill the pine martens. They're off limits. And that pine marten heads over to that food cache, friends. He can smell that meat in that food cache, and he's snooping around the food cache. Timber doesn't want him hanging out there. They can't kill him, so he decides to get the old bear banger out, and he fires off 2 bangers to scare that marten off, friends. All right, it's 27 degrees now, and he goes down to check the fishing line. And friends, he finds that stringer that got away, and we find out that it got untied. His paracord came untied. He gets a long pole, and he fishes that stringer out of the river. It's starting to freeze up. And friends, that big old 40-foot pike is still alive on that stringer. He pulls it in, and man, good on Timber. He gets those 7 or 8 meals back. And so he heads back to the shelter. He puts that second fish in his ice box along with that moose meat, seals up the food cache, and he decides to bring the fire inside of his shelter. The last 13 nights he's been sleeping in his shelter with no fire. Friends, it's getting cold. We see him build that fire in the shelter, and friends, it's just a big smoke problem. That shelter's not drawing good, and it's too smoky, and uh-oh, Timber's got a problem. He doesn't have an answer to that problem at this time. Okay, friends, day 37 now, 3:12 p.m. The show goes over to Dub. It's 26 degrees, frosty and cold. He goes down to the river, checks on his gill net. And what the river's doing, he debuts for the first time his winter parka, and he gets a big old coney in the gill net. In canoe, it's a fatty fish. They call it coney. And friends, he gets another pike. He's got that coney hanging up back at the shelter. He hangs that second fish, that big old pike, up at the shelter. And friends, he gets a third pike this morning. He's got 3 big fish hanging up back at the shelter. It's a good 26 degrees. Everything's freezing up. He can store his fish out in the open. I hope those birds don't come and eat it, but we'll see. And friends, the show ends right there. There's 4 people that remain. We got Sarah, we got William, we got Dub, and we have Timber. Friends, everybody's looking pretty strong at the end of the show. The show ends right there. And they show us a sneak peek of episode 9 coming up next week. And they show us Sarah in her shelter with a lot of pain. And she said her kidneys are hurting. And also we see William, something digs up that beaver that he buried under the rocks. I knew that was going to happen. So we can't wait for episode 9 next week, friends. That ends my recap. I really appreciate you stopping by the channel, listen to the recap. Before you leave, please consider subscribing. And if you do subscribe, smash that bell icon. In the drop-down menu, do select all, friends. Friends, I still got my money on Timber. Leave me a comment. Let me know who you guys think's going to win it. Still got 4 people. Listen, I appreciate everything you do for the channel. All your views, all your likes, all your shares. But most importantly, all your comments. Leave me a comment. Let me know who you think's going to win season 11 of Alone Arctic Circle. All right. As always, please don't depart from the faith. And for you, those of you out there who haven't given your life to Christ, friends, do it today. Don't wait. I'm giving you a special invitation. You don't need to wait and get cleaned up. Come as you are. Do it now. Just pray a simple prayer. Ask Jesus. Tell him you know that he died on the cross for you. Let him know that you need a Savior and invite him in, friends. He will. You'll be saved today. All right. As always, God is good. God is great. I see y'all on the next video. Already got a date.